This episode is brought to you by Amazon. The holidays are here, and you know what that means? It's time to get your friends and family the gifts they deserve. Take the stress out of shopping with Amazon's great deals and low prices on a huge range of items from toys to tech and much more. Whoever you're gifting for, Amazon has great prices on everything you need this holiday season. Shop Amazon for all your gifting needs.
Is it time to reimagine your future? The right business skills may make a difference in your career. At Capella University, we offer a relevant education that's designed to focus on what you need to know in the business world. We'll teach professional skills to help you pursue your goals, like business management, strategic planning, and effective communication. And you can apply these skills right away. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
All right. Welcome to the Misfit Nation. Have you forgotten how it felt that day? To see your homeland under fire and our people blown away. Have you forgotten when those towers fell? We had neighbors still inside, going through a living hell. And you say we shouldn't worry about Bin Laden. Have you forgotten? Those are lyrics by Darryl Worley just after 9/11 occurred in our country. Have you forgotten? It's been 20 years since the United States got kicked in the balls by Al-Qaeda and launched us into the longest war in our history, the global war on terror. Hell, we are just pulling out of Afghanistan now. Do you remember what life was like before 9/11? I kind of do. It was much simpler. No social media, barely any email, and people spoke face to face with each other. It was a crazy time in our lives. Do you remember where you were on the day it happened? I will never forget where I had the pleasure of being when our country was attacked. I was in the desert of Kuwait with the best soldiers in the world, the dirty Decon Dozen of the 1st Engineer Battalion, 1st Brigade, 1st Infantry Division. Most of this group has gone on to become great leaders in the United States Army and in their life ventures. Truly an amazing group of humans. When we got home, we saw patriotism everywhere that I can honestly say I do not remember since the bicentennial in 1976 when I was just a kid. This patriotism, however, was short-lived. After less than a year, the flags were gone, people were all about themselves again, and many act like nothing happened. There are tons of people who are patriotic on Memorial Day and the 4th of July, since they can party those days. Before serving in the Army, I was one of them. After serving, I'm never going to be like that again. You cannot look out from Liberty Park in Jersey City and see the Twin Towers anymore. There is that tower they built in this place. You can no longer just meet a loved one at the gate of an airport. Everything changed. Everything. Now, imagine you move to the city, just months after attacking the World Trade Center in 1993, and settle in blocks from the iconic buildings. You are then present when the attacks of 9/11 occur, and not only decide to stay after watching all the buildings fall from your apartment, you decide to dedicate yourself to ensuring the heroes of that day and that period after are never forgotten. You become a tour guide at the site of Ground Zero. Our next guest has written a book, Out of the Shadow of 9/11, an inspiring tale of escape and transformation. So without further ado, let's get author and tour guide Christina Ray Stanton on here.
So I had written you. Obviously, you have a big background with 9/11 from a different perspective,
Right.
and my perspective was really just being a resident of the neighborhood where the attacks took place. And I've lived in the financial district since, when we got married, really since about 2000.
Okay.
And there's been over 600 books written about 9/11, but I've read a lot of them, but I had never found one from the perspective of somebody who lived in the area. And I just thought that I decided to write a book about it just because I thought that it had some unique perspective on what the area was like before, during, and after, that just hadn't gotten out there, that many people hadn't heard that particular voice. And I just thought, well, it just might add to a greater knowledge of that day, just, more of a view of it. So that's what I did. So I spent 5 years writing it, because I'm not much of a book writer. So, and I of course used editors, but I'm glad that I wrote about it, because even more so, I've realized that, wow, yeah, I mean, a lot of people think that 9/11 consisted of, the airplanes and the towers, when it was a lot more than that, and it caused a lot of ripple effects that, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of sub stories that have gotten lost out there. I think very familiar to New York, and maybe like where you lived in Jersey City, but not so much around the rest of the country. And I know that because I'm also a licensed New York City tour guide. So I've been a tour guide since 1995. I got licensed then. So I was giving tours of the World Trade Center complex, years before the attacks. And then after the attacks happened, as time went on and years went by, and I would ask tourists, tell me what you know about the attacks. It was pretty narrow, I felt. It was across the board too, no matter where you were from in the United States. It was, again, about the planes and the towers. Again, very important stories, but I felt that there was a lot of one-dimensional kind of answers that I got. And so I was like, well, so I just kind of put my bid, in there to, maybe round out the information maybe a little bit more. But yeah, I definitely have a deep passion for 9/11 education, for sure. It's important.
And you have a much better perspective, I think, having a bird's eye view of everything that went down. I mean, you were just 6 blocks away, I think it says.
Yeah.
So that's rapid. That's really close to where the initial attack occurred, and you got to see not just the attack, but you witnessed it fall, and all the buildings around it also fall. And
right.
And the lives just displaced. And like you said, it wasn't the attack was all that happened. It was the third and fourth order effects of that attack that still are felt today.
Oh yes. So I'll tell tourists when they come up to New York City, and in the last couple of years, I remember, I think it was 3 years ago, that one of the stations that collapsed, the Cortlandt Street station, the NNR, they just got that back up and running literally 17 years after the attacks. That's such a lot. And people didn't know there's actually a station that's still not open from the attacks that imploded, or that, for instance, that remains are still being identified. That's a shocker for a lot of people. Or maybe that they even are still finding parts of the plane. I think it was only a few years ago that they found one of the landing gear or whatever lodged behind one of the buildings. And then those are side issues to what the real issue is that people are dying who inhaled the toxic dust from the day. And that's an ongoing horrible situation that's occurring. And a lot of people aren't as aware of that. But I think that we just recently passed the threshold of more people have died since 9/11 because they were poisoned by the dust and debris that came down than the amount that died that day. And it's an ongoing horrible thing. A lot of rescue workers and people died of COVID because their systems were already compromised through 9/11. So in a lot of ways, were related. And so those are just some important stories because the effects still go on to this day. People still suffer PTSD from that, and it's just again, it's not so far in the past. I take a lot of student groups on tours. And I try to, bring home that point that it really wasn't that long ago. In fact, it's so short that 9/11 hasn't made a lot of their textbooks just yet. Right. I was reading actually an article about that yesterday. That a lot of 9/11 education depends on the teachers, or what the teachers choose to tell their students, whether it's a history class or social studies or what have you. And it's really based on what the teacher knows themselves. Just because a lot of the textbooks haven't caught up with 20 years ago. So so definitely I have a passion because it's just ushered in a whole new world for everybody.
Yes, it changed a lot of the way people think. And I remember I came home after that deployment. It was like Christmas time, I think. We drove up there and the flags were all hanging along the parkway, like at every overpass, and once we got into New Jersey, there was flags everywhere showing patriotism. Then I went back after my next deployment to Iraq in 03, 04, and most of those flags were gone, and the vibe of patriotism was gone, except on the days when you get hot dogs and hamburgers. And
I talk about that in my book, that I remember within days after the attacks, I was walking my dog through the streets of Manhattan, and it was like an explosion of American patriotism. There were flags everywhere, and I don't consider New York City an unpatriotic city, but I have to say, you don't see flags, literally like everywhere, but there were. I mean, there were flags everywhere. There was tables with all kind of different flags for sale. I remember picking up a few. But just the whole country really was just exploding in patriotism.
Yeah, it was a shock to me to see it, because I mean, I never seen it before, and then I've seen it then, and then it just faded away rapidly. And even now, it's only. I mean, here it's pretty high patriotism because we have a military base right here, so everyone's pretty patriotic here. But as you spread away from that, you don't have that root to the military, I guess, or to someone that was involved with something. You don't have that patriotism everywhere you go anymore. And I guess it's looked down upon to have it by some people. Some people love it, some people hate it, but it is what it is. And it's like you said, people are forgetting about a major event that happened to our whole country to cause where we are today.
Well, some people will call it the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil, and that's true. But what we really should be knowing it for is the worst terrorist attack in world history. That it still is the definitive. It still is the worst in world history. This is a major U.S. event and world event. And actually, a surprise that I have is that there hasn't been, let's say, more movies about it. When I think of the World War II, there's a lot of movies out on that. There's quite a lot of movies out on all the wars. And there are a few movies out. I think it was the Flight 93, and then there's the one with Nicolas Cage about the last stairwell. But there really hasn't been a lot of coverage, or a lot of Hollywood kind of coverage on 9/11. There's tons of documentaries out, and I'm a documentary girl. I love documentaries. There's quite a bit on that, and as I've said before, there's quite a bit of books. A lot of the books are geared toward terrorists and terrorism and things like that. Not as much from the human perspective that I think. I mean, there are some for sure, but I just feel that the lack of knowledge is also reflected in popular movies, for instance. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to say the same thing. There's a lot of documentaries. I think last year I sat and watched History Channel, I think, all day.
Yes.
It was my first time I was able to sit down and just actually watch all these documentaries, because I was gone basically constantly until 2015. I didn't get to see all this stuff. I seen headlines, but I knew I was just doing my job somewhere else because of it. And watching the documentaries, I actually got to see a lot more of it. And I did see the Nicolas Cage movie because I like Nicolas Cage.
Yes.
So, but that was the only movie I really knew about the New York side of it. Flight 93 is just about the one flight.
Right, it's a slice, right? It's a slice of an aspect of the day, an important one, of course. I actually had a hard time through that because I understand that they really made that movie pretty close to the actuality, and it just grieves me so much to think that those people lived in that kind of terror, and it lasted a while. Just think about it, like 1 minute is a long time to be in terror like that, but for as long as they were, that's tough. And so it's a great movie. It's just hard for me to get through.
And it's not having that unknown of what's going to really happen next. And at that point, we didn't have awesome cell phone technology, and they had to use those little phones on the seats that used to be on the planes. And so that's how they were getting their updates, and that's how they found out that, oh, this might be the end for us.
Right. And I have to say that another aspect that I think kind of loses how horrifying it is the fact that it did take those two towers 102 and 56 minutes to come down. That's a really long time, and a lot of people survived. The
Yes.
the initial crashes, not necessarily in the planes I'm talking about, but people in the upper floors. But they had a lot. That's a long time to think about the impending doom. It's a lot, and conditions got worse and worse for them as they're realizing that their life is going to end. And it was an excruciating way and slow way to get murdered, essentially. And and there's no other way to there's no happier way to put it. It wasn't quick, it wasn't painless, it was painful, and it lasted a long time. And it was probably that growing understanding that this is the end. It just couldn't have been worse. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a horrible. The unknown feeling is what can drive you to basically insanity, and then some of the people were pushed to their breaking point, where they're basically cooking inside the building.
Right.
So they had no choice but to make that leap, and we've seen a lot do that day.
Yeah, I heard they think around 200.
Yeah.
And I think all of them were known to be coming from the North Tower, that just things were especially bad from that North Tower, in which of course fills me with total just horror, because my husband went to Clemson University and graduated from there. And there was a fraternity brother, an ATO fraternity brother, who had died in the North Tower. And I think about him, that those people, it was just really awful. That really their only cause of action that they could do after a while is to fall outside the windows. And it's just horrible.
Right.
You might have heard that about 200 people died in the elevators as well. It's considered the largest elevator disaster in history. And that was another particularly horrible death, because they were entombed in the elevators. They couldn't go anywhere. No one was there to save them. There was no elevator mechanics who were there to help them out. And how the building had them had the elevators, as they were literally locked inside. And just it just goes from worse to worse to worse to worse. There's and if I'm ever talking to a student group, I don't linger on some of the more horrific stories, because it's bad enough. But it's almost like, there's not an action movie or a movie that's bad enough to encapsulate how bad these deaths were. And it's something to remember. It is, it's why we never forget. It's why we need to remember just this horrible mass murder. But also, again, it just kind of ushered the United States out of any kind of innocence that anybody was in, and to a new age of terrorism. And that was the dividing line. So I have to say, the 9/11 Museum does a wonderful job at depicting this without making it unbearable. You know what I'm saying? So I remember the first time I went to that museum on the site, I couldn't get through it. I didn't last too long. But I'm a tour guide, and so guess what? I went all the time because I had to. And I got to where I actually know it very well at this point. And it's just done. It gets right up to that threshold of making you understand how horrible this was and how significant this was to our country, without making you run screaming out the door. And that's a hard line to walk. But it's a wonderful museum. I really wish every single group would go to it. Like I said, I do a lot of student tour groups, and about half of them do. I understand it's a downer. I understand it's when people want to go to Broadway shows and chill out in Times Square, that it kind of interrupts it brings us back to reality, and a city that has a lot of diversions. But it's an important museum to go to.
A ton of diversions. Yes.
And it's well done. So I just would say, I would just challenge everybody, just make time for that on in your New York City vacation.
Yeah, I think we were up there in either 18 or 19. I think it's pre-pandemic, and we went up there. We went to the site. We didn't go in the museum because it was just jam-packed with people. So, so we moved on.
Well, even to tell you the truth, just touring the grounds is fantastic. Right. I mean, it's just there's docent tours. There's tours of the actual of the memorial that the tour guides are issued by the Memorial Museum, and they're fabulous. But just even going to the memorial, even just for certain, take time for that, because it's wonderfully done. It's beautiful.
Yeah, we went to the reflection ponds for each tower. That was pretty amazing, and the statues that were there.
And art, it's technically artwork called reflecting absence. That's what its actual name is.
Okay.
But one of the aspects I think is most interesting about those ponds is how they have the names. I love the stories of how they decided to list the names. So instead of a generic A through Z, last name first, of the almost 3,000 people who died that day, and they also had the 1993 victims. They have people listed next to who meant something to them. So, for instance, if I told you about my husband's Clemson fraternity brother, he was dating somebody in his office, and they are listed next to each other. They both died. Cantor Fitzgerald, which is the company that lost 658 people, the most of any company in the Twin Towers, both Twin Towers together. So at any rate, but they're listed next to each other. So there's a lot of lovely stories about strangers who actually died comforting each other. And it's known that they were together when they died. And even though they had been strangers up until that point, they were listed next to each other. So there's just wonderful stories of how they decided to list the names. And that's one of the reasons I understand that they took so long to finish the memorials, is because they were trying to get so much input from different entities, from parents and coworkers, to see how they could be best placed. But that's wonderful.
And I think the horse soldier monument that's up there, those guys actually came from right here. The horse that's depicted at the World Trade Center site. Those guys actually, they were stationed.
You're talking about the sculpture at Liberty Park?
It's a horse soldier. It should be by the World Trade Center area. Yeah. It's they were the first guys to go in, and they went in with a piece of the World Trade Center into Afghanistan.
Oh, okay. I just know that there's a sculpture of a horse that it's next to the World Trade Center. It's next to the Sphere on this little acre park called Liberty Park. Actually, if I can give a little advice, my favorite place to view the memorial is Liberty Park. So Liberty Park is basically a 1 acre park that was built on the roof of the nearby, let's say, security checkpoint. And so it's kind of a makeshift park, but it's absolutely beautiful. But it's literally an overlook of the memorial. And I conduct a lot of my tours there. So we go up there and we see the Sphere, and we're able to look over the World Trade Center site. And it's a great overlook. I mean, then of course from there we go physically down to the memorial, but it's a little tip if anybody goes to the memorial, that definitely go up onto that little Liberty Park, and you're going to see what I mean, because there's nothing like it around. It's an elevated park right next to the World Trade Center complex.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Liberty Park. I think of Jersey City.
Oh, of course, yes. Yeah, Liberty State Park, right? Yeah, right.
That's how I was confused when you said this. No, it's not there.
Yes. Oh, yes. I understand what you're saying. Right, Liberty Park is just this little top of a building that they turned into a park. It's also interesting too, but they took a sapling from the Anne Frank tree and planted it there. Anne Frank, in her diary, she mentions a tree that she could see from her one window, and they actually cut some shoots off of that tree and they planted it there on this little park. And I just think that's a lovely place, and it's a proper tree now. It's bloomed and everything, but everything about the World Trade Center site is just wonderful. So
I think they did a great job with what they had there, and respectfully they did it.
No, they did, absolutely. Yeah.
So we really get into the COVID book, if you want to talk a little bit about that before we run out of time here.
Yeah. So, I started hearing, I think it was like last February, March, really, of 2020, very early, that if you went through 9/11, you inhaled that dust. We all know that compromised our systems. My husband and I are very aware of it. We're a member of the World Trade Center Health Registry that monitors our health from inhaling that toxic dust. And so when it was apparent that the pandemic was coming and it was going to be bad, we wanted to kind of clear out, to tell you the truth, and kind of spare us of potentially a bad case. And it was because it was completely related to 9/11. That was the original reason why we started getting particularly nervous about the coming pandemic. So we got on a flight. I think it was March 13th when it was clear that the pandemic was coming and things were starting to shut down. But I think it was just short of full on panic, really. But we got on a flight and flew down to Tampa, Florida. I am not from Tampa, but we flew down there to visit some friends before we moved on from there. And we were just really trying to outrun the pandemic is what we were doing, right? Well, we didn't do such a good job of outrunning it because we either caught it right before we got on the plane or on the plane, and we'll never know. But I felt fine on the plane. And there were very few people on that plane, and we all had masks. And at the time, we were wearing gloves even. And I felt fine as soon as we stepped off the plane. I thought, great, we'd outrun it. We've moved on. It's not going to get us. We're going to sequester ourselves here, and we're going to ride out this thing. But we didn't. And within days, I knew that this was going to be rough for me. And it was, and I was hospitalized twice. And the doctor told me I had about a 50% chance of surviving it because it was a really bad case. It was, one thing you don't hear a lot about how painful it was. I was in a huge amount of pain, more pain than I've ever been in any time in my life. And my husband and I talked about wills. We made all kind of plans. It just wasn't looking good. And I did, thank God, recover. But it was a long haul. I still really have no sense of taste or smell. I have what they call long haul syndrome, and I still I need to work on my lung capacity. I'm pretty stationary, whereas in New York City I walked 8 miles a day because you just do. Lost about 3/4 of my hair. But those are ancillary things. I'm just really glad to be here because there was definitely times when I knew that was a crucial point that was going to go either way. In fact, there was one night in particular, I really felt like that terrible little virus was trying very hard to kill me, and I knew that it was going to be the night of my life, and it was, and it worked really hard. So, but yeah, made it to the other side. But it made me think about 9/11 a lot because for me, the experience was related. And also I also, through our experience with 9/11, I suffered PTSD afterwards, and we had a long-term recovering then. I almost felt like with COVID, I had more resources within myself to face this calamity that I didn't have at 9/11. And a lot of that has to do with age and wisdom. I'm 51 now. I was, I guess, 31 when 9/11 happened. But I was unprepared to kind of face what our experience was in 9/11, and I really struggled for a while after that, emotionally and mentally. And when it came to this, facing COVID, I just felt like a lot more prepared, really through what I gained and what I learned through 9/11, that prepared me more emotionally to face this issue. So in my mind, they're completely related in more ways than one. But I'm still here, and my husband, thankfully, did not have any near as bad as I did. But it was, it's a nasty, nasty virus.
Yeah, I did not know I had it. I had it, I guess, in July of last year after having a huge training event here with soldiers. So I still train soldiers. And I went down pretty hard for almost a week after. And then when I got my second shot of Moderna, I went down extremely hard. And I reached out to my sister-in-law. She's a doctor, and other friends, and they said, yeah, you probably had it before and didn't even know it. That's why it's so bad now.
Oh, wow. Well, I really grieve for those who died, because it was, I know based on my experience, a lot of them it was a painful and lonely death. I was in the hospital in Tampa. I don't know Tampa. We were only there because we got a cheap flight there, and all of a sudden I'm hospitalized there. And of course, I'm alone, as people were, in quarantine in the hospital. And it's painful, and it's lonely, and it is it was a scary death and painful death for a lot of people, and it's so many people who died from it. So I'm glad that we're emerging, but I'm also thinking I have a lot of friends overseas who are still very much in harm's way. And of course, people are still dying in the country. I mean, I think I was already reading that the deaths are in the hundreds in New York City alone. I think in the town I'm living in Tallahassee, Florida, there's several deaths per week. And I mean, it's still going on. I have friends who live in South Africa and Madagascar who say that people are literally like dying in the streets there. And so to me, until we've all kind of emerged from pandemic, I feel like I'm not going to be one to say, yay, it's over, I'm out doing this and this. Like, it's still going on. There's still a huge amount of suffering. People are still dying in huge numbers. It's just terrible. I'm just still kind of shocked that this happened,
Yeah, it's I think it was a lot of it will never happen here mentality in the United States. I lived in Korea when SARS was going on there, so I seen that happen. I seen how they actually combated it there, and so I was kind of a witness to it. But they only combated it on their own people. So on those who were in Korea, Korean people, they were actually taking care of us as soldiers in the army over there. We were just living our life. We didn't take any chances, any risks that were crazy, but we still went out in the population and we went shopping. We did everything with the unknown fear factor that this also can kill us. So, and then when it happened last year here, I was like, so all that experience there, we should have wrote some stuff down to get ready.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I remember telling a friend of mine in South Africa, I was telling him go out and get at least just stock up on Tylenol, because it's so painful. It's about the only thing it responded to with me in my body. And he said, Christina, there's no Tylenol here. And I was like, oh my gosh, they actually, I was like, he has potentially to face this pandemic without even Tylenol. And like I said, it was just so excruciatingly painful. It breaks my heart. And India, I didn't mention India, just absolutely awful.
I watched them from a distance. So I kind of do some open source intelligence too. So I watched them, and I watched China, since they have the biggest populations, to see why they weren't getting the numbers we were having here. And then all of a sudden it finally happened. They were finally reporting it. And now it's a tidal wave now there. They're trying to play from the back, trying to catch up, and it's hard.
Well, yeah. So I wrote a book about 9/11, and I do a lot of speaking about 9/11, just in different venues. I'm actually going to be at a couple of prisons the next couple of weeks. I enjoy speaking there. I enjoy speaking about 9/11 just about to anybody, to tell you the truth, and they're an engaged audience, just like any other audience is. And I'm also speaking at a church Sunday, and it's part of it too. I like to educate. I mean, I'm a tour guide at heart, I think, and along with my first-hand account of it. But I just want people to really take it seriously and really remember on Patriots Day, what happened 20 years ago. And anniversary years are always big years, and It's a big year. So I'm just hoping that even in the midst of the pandemic, and people are trying to restart their lives again in some cases, that it won't get lost in the shuffle, so to speak.
Right. Hopefully everyone can start thinking remember it, but still move forward.
Right. Yes. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It'd be good for the people to actually still remember it this year because it's a big anniversary, 20 years ago. I mean, I had a squad of just basically young men and women with me in Kuwait when this happened, and they're all grown adults now with families of their own and doing great things in life because they took that as a lesson and they moved forward positively, and they've all had a positive life from then. And I just hope everyone else can have that same thing as they move forward past this 20th anniversary, and don't dwell on it, but just remember and have respect for it.
Right. I mean, it's a time to honor lives that were lost, and that, and also it's a good time to remember that about being patriotic. We live in a country that is hated by some, loved by some, but good or bad or whatever anybody thinks about this country, we're all in it, and to do our best to love each other and to look out for each other. I mean, I have to say that 9/11 had a real effect on New Yorkers. I mean, I lived there for I think 8 years before the attacks, and I just kind of always got the impression that it was a town that was out for itself and that people were kind of cold to each other. But I really saw that change after 9/11. I felt like people realized, well, if I'm safe, then we're all safe. People just started looking out for each other. They cared. If they saw a backpack in the middle of the street, they would call in. It was just a real shift that I still feel like is kind of going on nowadays. And yeah, so if there's a takeaway that's on the positive, that we need to look out for each other.
Definitely. Well, it's been great talking to you, Christina. I'm running out of time here, but if there's a way for people to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
I have a book website. It's Christina Ray Stanton, Christinaraystanton.com. So I have a book that I've written on the COVID experience and 9/11. And again, they're not total downers, even though they're tough subjects. They're subjects where I talk about things that I learned and how I grew through them, and along with what the actual event looked like going through it. So hopefully that there's some positive things that people can take from it. And so let's all remember this year's 20th anniversary and just remember those who died, and remember how much how much we mean to each other, and that we're accountable for each other, and we're accountable for our neighbor, and to help out where we can.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina. Thanks for being on. Thanks for taking some of your time to be with us today.
Sure. Thank you.
Wow, that was great chatting with Christina Ray Stanton and hearing her story of how she wound up in New York City, and then her witnessing of the horrific events of 9/11, and then further down the line, surviving COVID-19. Check out her work via her link in the show notes. As a reminder, voting ends on 10 September for the Veteran Podcast Awards, so please head over to veteranpodcastawards.com and cast your vote for us. Thank you. So you know how we do this. Thanks for taking some of your time to spend with us on the Misfit Nation. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and share the link as much as possible. If you want to, please become a supporter to help us carry this on. But you know what? We appreciate you. As always, till next time, be humble, stay hungry, and keep hustling. Because who are we? We are the Misfit Nation.